listeners, to another episode of the Mindful Living podcast with your host, Sana. Now, today in this episode, we are diving into a deeply transformative topic psilocybin, also known as psychedelic mushrooms, and how it plays a role in personal and spiritual transformation. And for this, I couldn't have a more incredible guest. And joining me is Sussanah Rose Stokes. She's a former Marine Corps officer who served two combat tours in Afghanistan before undergoing a profound spiritual awakening. And since then, she has dedicated her life as an energy priestess and embodied consciousness guide, leading powerful psilocybin assisted retreats and coaching programs. And through her faith based organization, which is House of Embodied Metamorphosis, she facilitates life changing experiences for individuals who are seeking holistic healing and growth. And today on Mindful Living, we are going to explore her journey, the science and the spirituality behind psilocybin, and the potential this sacred medicine holds for deep transformation. So let's get quickly started, listeners. So, Susanna, welcome to the show, and it's an absolute honor having you with us.
Thank you so much, Sana. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, Susanna, before we talk about the transformative power of psilocybin, I think our listeners would love to know a bit about your personal journey. So, it's really a powerful story from the military background to spiritual and healing. So, if you can take us back to that moment that sparked your spiritual awakening after your time in the military.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is so incredible to see how life takes us, right? Where it takes us. And I certainly never expected to be talking to you on this podcast right now as a priestess of plant medicine. When I started off, growing up in America, in Georgia, I grew up on a little farm there, and I knew I wanted to be a leader. And my grandfather and my whole father's lineage were all spiritual leaders. They were all leaders in the Methodist Church, bishops, things like that. And so, while I could have chosen that path very early on, my father was in the Marine Corps before I was born. And that inspired me to become a leader through a more the warrior path, what we might say, right? And as I went through the training and became an officer, I went very quickly to war. And it was during my first deployment where I had a moment where I was realizing I was watching us target someone with a missile on video. And I realized this person is not the enemy. And there's a lot of things in our world, and especially in warfare, where we say, oh, this person is other than you, or they are different from in some way. Um, and after studying, Gandhi and a lot of other leaders, I realized that this was just not true, that we are all one being. But it took me a while to get to that. And so when I got out of the military, after I got back from my second deployment, I decided I would not stay in that service, and I wanted to go a more peaceful route. And I was working with plant medicines one day, and I decided to go meditate on the top of a mountain in California while I was doing that. And I had a moment of profound knowledge and download, you might say, an insight that felt like a tornado. It felt like a massive opening of my energetic channel. And the voice said, Susanna, you are the perfect person to help this world through healing. And and it showed me all of the lineage of all of the people that it took to make me, all of my ancestors. And in that moment, I realized that my job um, was really to work with this medicine and was to offer healing. Yeah.
Mm. Wow. Well, it definitely, I think. it's definitely the story is an inspiration for a movie because we or a biopic probably because this is such a profound transformation from something background like military and then to spiritual awakening. And of course, I think most of us, we sometimes don't realize what's our purpose, or maybe we are not exactly aware that we are here on this planet, in this universe, for serving a purpose. So, it's really a blessing to, um, you know, hear the calling of your conscience and get to work on your purpose. So thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us.
Absolutely.
Also, did you have any resistance to this path initially, or given your background in the Marine Corps?
Oh, yes. Most definitely. Um, I mean, when sort of the voice of God comes down in a tornado of energy, the next question is, well, how do I do that? How do I offer healing? What does that look like? And of course, I was at that time I was in the corporate world. I was working for Facebook, um, which uh, which is now Meta, and so I was very satisfied in my egoic path, right? I was like, "Oh, yeah, I have a big fancy job. I have the condo that I want. I have the car that I want. I have all of these things in my daily life that feel really good to me." And I realized that there was something missing and something much more. But the process of getting there was all about resistance. So you said the exact word. The what it took, even after that moment of spiritual awakening, was my body had to start shutting down to really convince me to listen, to say, "Hey, Susanna, you're not listening to me. You're not treating me well." And this, me being my body. And so I ended up having a series of pelvic infections for about a year between 2019 and 2020
Oh.
that were very, very difficult, and I wasn't able to work during that time. I was actually let go from one of my jobs after Facebook, and the corporate world and the ego world had to keep spitting me out and saying, "This
Yeah.
is not for you. Don't come back here." And so the resistance in my body built up until there was so much inflammation that I had already had 2 kidney stones, and then I had a series of these infections that um, really brought my attention to myself and to me caring for myself, which was huge. That was a huge process.
Yeah, yeah, lovely, lovely. Also, uh, do you see any parallels between the discipline of military life and the surrender required in spiritual transformation?
I love this question. Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Yes. Most definitely. It's funny, sometimes people say this seems like a strange transformation, but I actually believe that the archetype that we embody before priest or priestess is almost always warrior, that we need the energy of the warrior because the energy of the warrior is this strength, this ability to be calm in chaos, the ability to be still when there is intense pain and intense pressure coming through the body. And you take those skills and you transfer them into spiritual service, in which you realize that number one, you no longer have to fight anyone because your energy is powerful enough to just move people away. That people will not harm you because you are now protected. And then in order to then up level or to step into a new layer of consciousness and a new layer of offering service, you have to be with the darkness. You have to be with these very uncomfortable feelings like shame and guilt and anger that are very profound and present in our collective. And so, yes, I would say that it's almost necessary to be a warrior before you are a priest or priestess.
Wow, wow. That's a really, really great answer. And I'm really happy that you mentioned about archetypes. Uh, Also, Susanna, you talking about House of Embodied Metamorphosis, which you founded, and there you work with a very unique strain of psilocybin, which is called Trinity. What makes Trinity different from other psilocybin strains?
Yes, we deeply believe that, first of all, mushrooms of all kinds are magical, even the non-psychoactive ones. So I'll just like give a little hype to mushrooms for a second because what mushrooms do um in nature is they turn death into life. They are the rebirthing species, which is incredible. They literally break down the things that are dying so that it then can be nutrients for other things, right? Which for me is just, it's basically magic. Um, but when you get into the world of psychoactive or hallucinogenic psilocybin mushrooms, um, there are so many strains out there that really are nuanced and they have subtle differences. And while you can ingest any of them and they will offer you healing, at Metamorphosis, have a we wanted to work with and partner with a medicine because I deeply believe it's partnering with, we're not using it. It's its own consciousness, so it's its own entity in our organization. We wanted to partner with one that had a balance that
Mhm.
works in the body on what we know as the 3 Dantiyans. In Hindu culture, there is, of course, the 7 chakras. There are many chakras, but the 7 major chakras that are in the body system. In Chinese,
Mhm.
medicine, there are the 3 Dantiyans, which kind of group these 7 chakras into 3, and you have the lower, the middle, and the upper. And so what makes Trinity unique is Trinity is a strain that has been blended at a subgenetic level. So before it's even planted, it's blended with 3 different strains. One is PE6, the second one is tidal wave, and the third one is Aztec god. And what's very interesting about all of these is each one governs one of the Dantians. So PE6, penis NV6, governs the lower energy center. Tidal wave governs the middle energy center. And then Aztec god governs the upper energy centers. And that, to us, creates the most balanced and embodied experience of transformation that you could have.
Wow. Wow. That's quite exciting. And
Mm.
how does this psilocybin experience in your retreats? How do they differ from say a conventional or a traditional clinical setting?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, our organization, our vision is to be the bridge between the clinical and the ceremonial. So we have elements of both, but there is a big difference between what we do in our retreats and containers and what you would see in, for example, like a clinical trial.
Mhm.
Um, Of course, in clinical trials, often your journey will be in a sort of medical space, right? A more clinical space that's indoors. You have some music, you put a blindfold on, you go inward with the medicine, and then you are guided by a facilitator that is trained in the more scientific and clinical aspects of this medicine. In our containers, they are almost always outdoors, um, and or at least part of them will be outdoors, but most of the spaces that we choose are outdoor spaces that have a covering over them. And then we are often in a retreat space that's in nature. It's deep in the woods or in the mountains or near some body of water, near something that is going to connect you with earth energy, because we believe that the land itself is one of the most powerful facilitators, that we're actually facilitating in partnership with nature herself. And then we facilitate it a little more in terms of spirituality. You're still going to maybe wear a blindfold. We have facilitators there. We have medical staff. We have these ways of using modern science to prepare you and prepare your mind, for example, so that you know how to work through things like ruminating or intrusive thoughts through psychology and psychotherapy techniques. But then we're also going to introduce you to the spirituality of the medicine. And we're going to encourage you to connect with not only your energy centers, but also something that is bigger than you, some universal source or a spirit guide or some being that you feel deeply connected to, which will allow you to achieve a higher state of consciousness through being with the medicine. And those are really some of the big differences. And also, I would say the group aspect. Most clinical trials are individual. We have individual one-on-one containers as well, but we prioritize people being in groups because we believe that that activates the mirror neurons in the brain in which you are learning in community, and so you learn faster than you would by yourself.
Mm, interesting, interesting. And uh, I think before recording this episode, we were talking. We mentioned about the misconceptions. So around psychedelics or psilocybin, some people approach psychedelics with hesitation because there are a lot of connotations attached to them. Particularly because of historical stigma and, in fact, legal restrictions. What would you say to skeptics who view psilocybin as, just another drug?
Mm. It is interesting. One of the facilitators I know says we live in a society where medicine is drugs and drugs are medicine. And I think I think that's pretty accurate. We consider a lot of things that are pharmaceutically created and created by man to be safe, while the things that are in nature to be either dangerous or harmful. And I think a lot of this is has been basically messaging or communication that was created by some of our governance and our authoritative systems, right? So in America, for example, back in the 60s, President Richard Nixon created a whole propaganda against, quote, the war on drugs, which was targeted at LSD and psilocybin and any other plant medicine. And they created videos and all sorts of advertising around how these medicines were going to harm you and they were going to cause you to jump out of a building or something in which your mind was taken over. And the reason for that was because it was causing people to drop out of the war effort in America and for people to not go to the Vietnam War. They were becoming pacifists and they were saying, we're just not going to do it. And that was a threat to our governmental system, at least the way that the government saw it and the way that that leadership saw it. But now we're realizing and we're coming back to the realization that the early tribes had, that these medicines are actually regenerative and they are sustainable and they are things that don't harm your body system. They actually regrow neurons in your brain. But the pharmaceutical industries have capitalized, of course, on medications and man-made drugs that cost a lot of money to create and are short-lived, or they cause things like tachyphylaxis, which is where you have to take more to get the same effect over time, which means you have to come back to that organization and buy it more and more and more. And that ultimately creates more revenue for them. And this is not how we want to do things. We don't want people to have to be addicted to something and then to need it in order to stay alive. We want someone to ingest something and then eventually it be obsolete. So I'll say this, for example, I no longer feel the need to connect with plant medicine at this season of my life really at all, but even if I went through another transformation, I might go back to it a couple of times in some powerful ceremonies, but the number of times that I need to engage with this medicine is very limited. And so that means that I can remain myself throughout it all. And I think that that's very critical because I don't want to be needing, for example, an antidepressant for the rest of my life in order to just stay sane.
Absolutely. And as you rightly mentioned about that, about the drugs and the medicine. The medicine is a drug. Before we wrap up, Susanna, if our listeners would wish to explore more about the transformative benefits of psilocybin, explore more about the work you are doing about your retreats and coaching programs, how they can do that.
Absolutely. We would love to have you. Um, we run our organizations primarily in North America at this moment. I do have a dream and vision of expanding all across the world, but we run our retreats in the United States and in Costa Rica. And you can always look at our website for our upcoming gatherings. A lot of our gatherings are also virtual. So we share a lot of our wisdom and so many of our facilitators through virtual spaces. And you can find that at metamorphosis.ventures. And then you can also follow us on Instagram at Embodied Metamorphosis. And you're welcome to also follow me for my personal content at Sussanah Roses. Susannah with an H on Instagram because we want to share all of this information. The medicine of the mushrooms, the medicine of psilocybin and these plant medicines comes through our words too, right? They can come through the virtual spaces, and you don't have to just attend a retreat in order to get their magic.
Lovely, lovely. We'll have all the details mentioned in the show notes. And listeners, that was Sussanah Rose Stokes sharing her journey, her work, and the way she bridges science, spirituality, and transformation, which is really, really inspiring. So, if you want to learn more about psilocybin, the metamorphosis method, or check out her retreats, coaching, or connect with her personally, you can refer to the show notes along with this episode. And Susanna, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation.
Thank you, Sana. It was such a pleasure to be here with you today.
And to all of my listeners, once again, if this episode connected with you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone, anyone who might benefit from this knowledge. And until next time, stay mindful and keep exploring.